Imagine a young man who had everything: beauty, talent, youth, and fame. That was Andy Gibb. He was born into one of the most talented music families. Do you remember him? Andy had it all: beauty, talent, and money. But his young and happy heart was not prepared to face the dark side of the entertainment world and ended up getting lost in addiction, depression, and sadness. Let's get to know Andy Gibb's story. He was born on March 5, 1958, in Stamford, England, as the youngest of 5 children to Barbara and Hugh Gibb. Andy had 4 siblings: Barry, the twins Robin and Maurice, and a sister named Leslie. When Andy was just 6 months old, his family, who didn't have much money, decided to move to Australia through a government program that paid for the trip and promised good jobs. So, in 1959, Andy and his siblings embarked for Australia. Interestingly, on the same ship was a dancer named Carol Jones, who years later would have a famous daughter in music, Kylie Minogue, Australia's pride. In 1967, after 8 years in Australia, Andy's family returned to England. His older brothers were already known in Australia, singing in small clubs like the Bee Gees. They achieved great success in England and became one of the most legendary groups in music history. Andy was always a cheerful, funny, and mischievous child. His parents always forgave him for his mischief. Movie producer Tom Kennedy, a friend of the Gibb family, said that Andy was a cheeky scoundrel but with a heart of gold, and everyone in the family adored him. When Andy was just 11 years old, he would try to convince Tom to buy beer for him, which was unusual for a child. Andy's mother, Barbara, recounted that she would sometimes send him off to school, but instead, he would hide in the stables and spend the day sleeping among the horses. He would return home smelling of manure, but would swear that he had been to school. Thanks to the Bee Gees' enormous success, Andy had a very comfortable and money-filled childhood, which was uncommon for someone his age. When he was just 12 years old, his parents bought a luxury Rolls-Royce with a private driver, which he used to go to school and wherever he pleased. At first, Andy loved going to school in the Rolls-Royce, and his classmates found it amusing. But soon, as often happens with many things, they began to envy and bully Andy. He became bored with school and dropped out at 13. Instead, he picked up a guitar that his older brother, Barry, had given him and started singing for tourists on the island of Ibiza, earning some money doing covers of Bee Gees songs. Andy's first recording was a song called My Father Was Rebel, written by his brother Maurice and recorded in August 1973. In June 1974, at just 16 years old, Andy formed his first band, Melody Fire, named after a Bee Gees song. Sometimes, there was talk of Andy joining the Bee Gees, but he didn't like the idea of being seen as the baby of the family and decided to pursue a solo career. His brother Barry thought that Australia, where the Bee Gees had started, could be a good place for Andy. So, in late 1974, Andy returned to Australia with his band. They were greeted by their sister Leslie, who had married and decided to live there permanently. The young men started working and writing various songs. Andy made his first appearance on Australian TV at 16. Unfortunately, the experience in Australia was not as expected. The Bee Gees had struggled a lot to become famous and had no money in the beginning, but they worked hard. Andy, on the other hand, had no financial problems, as his brothers were generous with him. His bandmates, however, needed to work to eat, while Andy was always partying, drinking, and meeting many women. The work was light and often interrupted, which led his disappointed bandmates to return to England. After that, Andy joined another band called Zinta, with some local success, but the project didn't last long. In November 1975, at 17 years old, Andy released his first single, Words and Music, which reached number 78 on the Australian charts but would become more popular over time. On July 11, 1976, surprisingly, Andy married Englishwoman Kim Reeder in Australia, a young woman he had met at school and dated a few times. Andy was only 18 years old. In 1977, the young couple moved to the United States, where the Bee Gees were already world famous and had all the comfort money could buy. Like good brothers, they invited Andy and Kim to join them, but Andy's festive and intense lifestyle was not prepared to face the dark side of success. The dark side of fame and show business was hard for Andy. He had experimented with drugs before, but only occasionally. Suddenly, he was thrust into a world where drugs were common, and with his tendency to excess, he couldn't resist. The youngest of the brothers began to lead a life of parties, drinking, and recklessness, frightening even his own relatives. His wife tried to stop him and threatened to leave him, so Andy tried to slow down. Having famous brothers paved the way for Andy. In early 1977, the Bee Gees managed to get their manager to arrange a solo contract for Andy, and they started working on some songs for him. In April 1977, they released the song, I Just Want to Be Your Everything, written by his brother Barry, who also did backing vocals. The guitar was played by Joe Walsh of the Eagles as a special favor to the Bee Gees. Barry wrote this song in just 20 minutes, enough time to create a massive hit, winner of several gold records and generating large financial gains. The song reached #1 on the Billboard chart on July 30th, 1977, and stayed there for 4 weeks. It also reached #1 in Australia and Canada, and reached #26 in the UK. Andy, at just 19 years old, became the idol of girls and earned his first millions of dollars. He was considered by fans to be the most handsome of the brothers and the one with the best voice. In September 1977, Andy released his first album, Flowing Rivers, and his second single, Love is Thicker Than Water. Once again, the music was a total success, reaching #1 on the Billboard chart and establishing Andy as a superstar on the same level as his famous brothers. Women chased Andy, who was handsome, famous, and funny. The drug-fueled parties multiplied. Of all the drugs available, Andy became addicted to cocaine, one of the most addictive. He wanted to please everyone, and it was common for him to donate his money during parties, buying drugs, alcohol, and paying everyone's bill. His wife couldn't take this behavior anymore. Andy begged her to forgive him, but she left him and returned to Australia. What neither of them knew was that Kim was pregnant when she boarded the plane to go back home. Andy Gibb and Kim Reeder divorced on January 15, 1978, and their daughter Peta was born 10 days. Later, Andy's daughter, Peta, stated that she didn't know her father. She knew he was a famous singer, but to her, Andy Gibb was just a voice on the other end of the phone. Peta has 2 sons, Flint and Derby, who never met their famous grandfather. To escape the pain of his wife's abandonment, Andy began working on his second album, Shadow Dancing, released in April 1978. The title track was a huge success and became Andy's third song to reach #1 on the Billboard charts, where it remained for 7 weeks. This song was written by all 4 Gibb brothers. From the album, 2 other songs were released that also became very successful, An Everlasting Love and Don't Throw It All Away. Between July 1977 and July 1978, Andy managed to take his first 3 singles to the top of the charts, something unprecedented for an American solo artist. In January 1979, Andy appeared on the famous UNICEF show, which brought together big stars to fight child hunger in Africa. During the show, the group ABBA performed their hit, Chiquitita, and donated the proceeds to UNICEF. Stars like Donna Summer, John Denver, Olivia Newton-John, and Rod Stewart also participated. In February 1980, Andy released his third and final studio album, After Dark, which contained 2 successful songs, Desire and a duet with Olivia Newton-John titled, I Can't Help It. Andy also had a relationship with Olivia. In March 1980, the band Queen invited Andy to record the first verse of their song, Play the Game. Although they recorded the verse several times, the recording was never used in the final cut. In September 1980, a compilation album of Andy's hits was released, which included two new songs, Time is Time, which reached number 15 in January 1981, and Me Without You, which reached number 40 on the charts. Andy's dependency issues were escalating. His behavior became problematic, to the point where the record label decided to fire him and not renew his contract. For a label known for being greedy, this showed how much drugs were affecting Andy's personal and professional life. In January 1981, while recording a television program, Andy met actress Victoria Principal, famous for her role as Pamela Barnes on the TV series Dallas. The chemistry between them was immediate, and they soon began a romance that monopolized all the magazine covers of the time. His brothers did not agree with the relationship, as Pamela was 30 years old and Andy only 22. The situation worsened when they realized that Pamela used several drugs, especially cocaine, which only strengthened Andy's addiction. In love, Andy didn't listen to the criticisms, and they even recorded a duet, All I Have to Do Is Dream, which only reached position 51 on the Billboard chart. This was Andy's last recorded song, and the only one recorded by Victoria. Andy's behavior was becoming increasingly unstable. He drank too much, missed interviews, and canceled performances at the last minute. On one occasion, as he was about to board a plane at Los Angeles Airport, authorities confiscated a gun and detained him for several hours. On another occasion, several grams of cocaine were seized from him at the airport. In 1981 and early 1982, Andy was hired to host the famous music show Solid Gold, but after a few months, he was fired for bad behavior and absences caused by his drinking. In March 1982, Pamela broke up with Andy and soon married a millionaire plastic surgeon. The breakup was the hardest blow of Andy's life, and he fell into a deep depression, spending whole days in his room using drugs, not eating, and not talking to anyone. In 1983, Andy had the opportunity to perform several important musicals on Broadway, but after a few months, he was fired. The producer explained that when Andy was at the theater, he was a joy, but he didn't stay there long enough. They would lose him on weekends, and he would only come back on Tuesday, exhausted and embarrassed. Although he had a lot of talent, Andy couldn't maintain the necessary discipline. Dependency and depression problems were consuming Andy, and he was spending so much money that his financial situation was worsening more and more. Andy Gibb had it all: beauty, talent, youth, and fame. But that wasn't enough. Do you remember him? He was born into one of the most talented music families. He had beauty, talent, and money, but his young heart wasn't prepared for the dark side of show business and was ultimately destroyed by addiction, depression, and heartbreak. Andy was born on March 5, 1958, in England. He was the youngest of 5 siblings: Barry, Robin, Maurice, and Leslie. When Andy was just 6 months old, his family moved to Australia, where the older brothers began singing in small clubs. They became the Bee Gees, one of the most famous groups in history. Andy was cheerful and mischievous. He would often hide in the stables instead of going to school. His family forgave him for all the mischief, and he grew up surrounded by love. At 13, Andy dropped out of school and started singing for tourists. In 1973, he recorded his first song. At 16, he founded his first band, Melody Fire, and later moved to Australia to pursue a music career. Andy released his first single in 1975, and in 1977, his hit, I Just Want to Be Your Everything, reached the top of the charts. He became a superstar, but also began experimenting with drugs. The parties and the addiction escalated, and Andy ended up driving away his wife, Kim, who returned to Australia pregnant. Despite his musical success, Andy faced personal difficulties. In 1981, he met actress Victoria Principal, and the two began a tumultuous romance. Their drug addiction worsened the situation. Andy was fired from several jobs for misconduct, and in 1982, Victoria ended the relationship, leaving Andy devastated. Andy's financial situation also worsened. He was hospitalized several times to treat his addiction. In 1984, he performed at the Vina del Mar Festival in Chile, and in 1985, he was admitted to the Betty Ford Center. He seemed to be improving, but in 1987, he suffered a severe collapse and was hospitalized again. He tried to recover, even obtaining a commercial pilot's license, but the addiction continued to haunt him. In 1988, Andy suffered several panic attacks and was hospitalized. 2 days after his 30th birthday, he died of myocarditis, a severe inflammation of the heart caused by years of cocaine abuse. He was buried at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Hollywood, alongside stars like Michael Jackson. His brothers deeply mourned his death. In an interview, Barry said that 3 days before Andy passed away, he had hung up the phone angry, not knowing it would be the last time he would speak to his brother. Andy Gibb was a dreamer who had it all, but didn't know how to handle fame. He flew too high and burned his wings quickly. Leave in the comments what you think of Andy's story and what your favorite song of his is. See you soon.